Burai Fighter. Defeat the Burai using massive weaponry. And welcome to Nostalgia, a chronological exploration of every NES game released in North America. I'm Mike.
I'm Sean.
And I'm Joe.
Guys, I played this shmup wrong for the first 5 minutes.
Oh, I mean, I played it wrong for the first maybe 30 to 40 seconds.
Is that in the sense of, like, the direction you're facing related?
Isn't it funny that, like, first off, Joe, that there's a way to interpret how I could be playing it wrong, but also that, like, we could be playing so many shmups on on this system and on this chronological journey and just in life. Everybody has to eventually play a shmup, and yet I'm still finding out ways to play them wrong. And so, yes, this game has multiple direction shooting, which we'll get into in a minute, but there is a way that it wants you to do that multi-direction shooting that just wasn't clicking in my brain for the first few playthroughs of this game. And I was like, wow, I was so convinced that the game couldn't be that bad that it had to be me. And so I took the time, figure it out, try some things, eventually figured it out. It's a fine game, I'm happy to report. I did get further than the very first set of enemies, but
that's really big of you, Mike, to just know that it had to have been you.
Yeah, but you know what's funny about that too is like that the very first enemies that you are greeted with could be the ones to be your downfall. Like, it's not even like there's some kind of, I was playing and I was getting by, but then eventually, like, there was just too many enemies and I wasn't shooting correctly, so I just gave up on the game. It's the very first enemies you run into this game that let you know, like, no, if you want to defeat enemies in this game, you're gonna have to figure out how the shooting works.
So let's maybe
I could say that
stop. Let's stop pussing around, right? Like, let's describe what we're talking about.
Yeah. Go into it. Go for it.
So basically, what Mike and I both experienced, and maybe Joe, did you experience this too?
If we're talking about the same thing, once you explain it, I'll confirm that was what I experienced.
Okay. Basically, yeah, there's 8 different directions you can fire in, and like many games that you can fire in 8 different directions, like that, it feels like you always have to be firing in the direction that you're moving. But once you start holding the button down, then you realize that you can continue firing in the original direction and move freely.
Yeah, I did experience that exactly as well.
Okay.
It's crazy that could be an issue that all three of us would run into, not talk about until the day of the episode, but I'm glad we all were able to overcome it.
I would venture a guess that 90% of people who play this game that didn't read the manual have that issue at first.
Because, yeah, when I think of a shmup, I'm thinking of, like, unless you have some power-up, you should be pressing the button each time you want to fire, because it's like part of the skill, right? I mean, I don't really understand shmups, but I've always felt that was one of the reasons. And then there have also been other shmups where this is sort of an issue. Like what was the Commando? Like, yeah, you could fire in several different directions, but you always had to be walking in that direction. So I just figured that was the thing. You know what? It didn't take long, but it was a sort of like aha moment. So maybe we're just dumb enough to be able to experience that aha moment.
See, I had almost like the opposite of an aha moment because I was playing for a while, very frustrated. Every time I would, obviously try and go in one direction, I would turn that direction. And then, and I kept dying and I was doing it a lot. And then, like, after a while, I kind of stopped noticing it. And then a while later, it just suddenly dawned on me, like, oh, it hasn't been happening anymore. Because I just naturally started holding down the button as things got harder. And I was like, I don't remember when that stopped. But then I realized, this game's not so bad anymore. Like, but I don't remember the moment when I realized it just slowly started to happen for me.
And what's funny about that very first group of enemies is that they kind of home into you from, first they're spread out and then they are closing in on you. So there isn't really a way to avoid them. You kind of have to shoot them to get past them because you're in a narrow space and the enemies are heading directly towards you. So you either have the option of being like a very skilled shooter and while moving also like having twitch-like reflexes to go back into shooting straight on and taking out the next variable line before moving in another position and shooting that particular enemy down. Like that requires some sharp shooting. Instead, to Sean's mention, is that like by holding down the button, something that you would usually think would fire one single shot, it now fires shots over and over and over again. Not in like a turbo sense, but definitely not in an unexpected way. And once you figure that out, all of a sudden, the multiple direction shooting really frees up this game and makes it really cool and kind of reminds me of, Section Z, a game where the A and B button were being used for the A button would shoot to the right and the B button would shoot to the left. So as they are on the controller, it would make sense and you would be able to switch on the fly. Here, you're able to shoot in all cardinal directions and move freely around the screen at the same time. And I know that doesn't sound revolutionary, but because it is 8 directions, it certainly gives you more power than any horizontal or vertical shmup did in the past, where you're mostly just shooting a linear line until you get power-ups that give you spreads and the like.
Yeah, it solves this issue that I've had with a bunch of other shmups where, like, as soon as you pass something, it's just still a threat behind you, but you can't do anything about it. And yeah, I think Section Z did that too, but this also gives you the option to shoot up or down, and it you do start to notice that like some of the enemies are designed in a way where you got to think like, oh, I have to get beneath this thing and shoot up at it, or get around its armor. So at least it wasn't just like a function, but it's like the game was somewhat designed around it too.
Yeah, it also just sort of feels cool to get at like a diagonal angle to get maybe like a turret that in any other shmup would be almost impossible to hit before you like get to a certain point in the scroll, and just sort of snipe it, just sort of drift in and snipe it, It feels cool.
So other than how you shoot and what power-ups you receive, one of the biggest identifiers for any shmup, especially these 2D ones, is whether it's a horizontal or vertical shmup. And we've seen many examples of both, and in fact, we've seen examples where stage 1 is horizontal, and then, this is also doing vertical stages, and you switch between them. That's cool, but in Burai Fighter, they're actually horizontal and vertical stages all at once. It's kind of a on-rails shooter, think like Star Fox 64 style, where the player is expected to keep up with the movement of the screen in any particular direction it's scrolling, because if you do get stuck in a corner that you can't navigate around because the screen has scrolled past that point and you have missed your exit, you will die. You will be like crushed seemingly by the end of the screen, which doesn't really make any sense. It's never implied that the Burai are capable of eating the universe behind you, but that is what's happening.
Well, I mean, it's a Mario thing, like in...
Yeah, but I would have a lot to say about those too.
I'm not saying that it's permissible. I'm just saying that it's not unheard of. But it's kind of funny that we saw that in Mario with a consistently scrolling stage in one direction at a constant speed, and then in this one, it's just sort of like taking you on a tour, and it gets distracted, and it'll go up and down, and not random places, but it's kind of silly the sort of movements that the camera will make to either deviously lead you into a trap of pickups, unless you're skilled enough and you've played it enough times to know exactly when it's going to reverse course. But it kind of gives it it feels kind of silly when it just changes direction randomly.
Most of the time you can chalk it up to like, okay, like the game is kind of co-piloting, like it knows where I'm supposed to be going. So like, this is why my character, because canonically, you have to imagine that this character has control over where he's going, right? Like, is deciding to go these places.
Yeah, in the
So
deep
it's just
lore, he has agency.
but I mean, it's just like that's what I think of when I think of like any other shmup that's scrolling like that, where I'm like thinking, okay, like yeah, the scrolling, I'm not really considering that like part of the story. That's just a gameplay mechanic, and I need to be going to the right, so it's going to the right. But this way, it's like, oh, so we're going up, but then like when I get to one spot, it just suddenly completely reverses course when I'm in like a shitty spot and goes the other way. Like, there's no reason for my character to do that.
No. It's simulating your indecision.
Yeah, that's right. And it could be the death of you.
The thing we're trying to stop the Burai from doing is controlling the camera. They have taken control of the world's cameras, and as a result, if we don't take them down, we'll always have to move to their will.
Yeah,
Whoa.
and I guess like to that point though, like in seriousness, like while in any side scroll or like auto scrolling level of Mario and stuff, like yes, the camera is like one of the adversaries, but in this more than anything, it feels like wow, this camera is like trying to kill you sometimes.
And I gave a Star Fox 64 shout out there for the rail shooter thing I was suggesting the game might be because the camera guides you. But there's also even a little more truth to that because if you are able to find certain gaps in the levels, things that look like, I wonder why it laid out like this, you can actually, by going into those gaps, cause the camera to then switch orientations and lead you to secret rooms with power-ups and stuff that you wouldn't have otherwise been able to access. And that is very much a Star Fox 64 thing and other rail shooter games too, where like, you have to, in the very first level of Star Fox 64, like you have to do a certain set of objectives in order to be able to
do a barrel roll.
No, they don't do a barrel roll, but in Star Fox 64, the first level, you have to go you have to save a specific character, and you have to go under these structures in the lake. And by doing that, by going under all of them, something you might not think to do, but kind of like the game nudges you towards it, it will take you through the waterfall instead of going through the normal stage, and you'll actually fight a completely different boss and everything. And that's a much more involved idea than what Burai Fighter is laying out. But still, the idea is there. And so I ask you guys, is Burai Fighter a shmup or is it a rail shooter?
Are they exclusive? Are they mutually exclusive?
I don't think they are, but I just wonder, like, does rail shooter apply here?
I would say yeah, actually. I mean, I hadn't thought of that until you mentioned it earlier, but like that's exactly what it feels like. I mean, I'm just not used to seeing that kind of thing in a 2D style, but I don't see why it wouldn't apply.
Well, then I would say that then shmup is just a subgenre of rail shooter.
Well, yeah, I guess I would agree based on that also. So like, yeah, I guess so.
Or the other way,
rail
right?
Shooter, huh?
The other way, rail shooters.
No,
are
I guess it's saying
subgenre
that like
of
a shmup, a regular traditional shmup, is still on rails. It's just going in one direction.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, okay. So yeah, all side scrollers then by that nature are rail shooters.
No, yeah, because you don't. No, because a side scroller, you are the agent of the camera. Like the
you're
camera
the
follows
conductor
you.
of you're still on rails. It's just
right.
you're
So every
controlling
auto
when you move.
scroller, every auto scroller.
Yeah.
Sure. I guess I would. I just wouldn't call. I would just call it a shmup to simplify things. I aside from a few of the levels.
Yeah, I mean, generally when I think of rail shooter, I do think of obviously like the camera moving in all different directions and stuff. So like that's what would differentiate it for me, like at least in what I would personally consider it. But I want to point out that there are some levels, I want to say they're like bonus levels, where you're not on rails, but you're still like kind of controlling it like a shmup, which is I don't think we've ever seen in a shmup game.
Yeah, it's sort of. I mean, it's not in any way like Zelda, but it's like a top-down. Zelda also didn't have the camera follow you, but it's a top-down. You are controlling where the camera goes. It's also sort of like a not hide and seek, but you're trying to find something.
It's like a maze.
Yeah,
sort of,
It's not really even a maze because you can cut right through the
Yeah.
lines. It's more
it's
so
just a space.
Yeah,
an
it's
open
space
with something there.
Make sure you pay attention to the screen prior to the level because otherwise you may just play it forever.
Wait, what? Why? What is that?
It's the map.
Oh, there was a map on the screen. I literally just was playing it for a while and lucked out and found
You
the
did?
thing.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, but it only. I was just flying around and I was like, oh, there's like an enemy there, so I'll shoot it, and then
I'll shoot it.
That was it. I didn't play the second. I didn't get far enough to play the second version of that level. So yeah, I think I just lucked out.
It's a weird way to do it because it's not especially interesting. Like
No, no, it's not.
Mike, do you have any thoughts?
I don't have any thoughts on that. I was actually going to move on to another thing, another shmup trope, which is the power-up system. And in this game, on your UI, you can see you have laser, ring, and missile. And those are your 3 guns. They have unlimited ammo, so there's never, a preservation method here. But there are these red orbs that you pick up, and they seemingly switch on the fly between L, M, and R for laser, missile, and ring.
And S.
And what's that?
And S.
Oh yeah, what's the S for?
I think just speed.
Speed. Okay, yeah. And so when you pick those up, it adds to the counter of the laser, ring, and missile. If the counter hits 5, then the weapon reaches level 2. And then eventually you can boost them to level 3, but nothing beyond that. And so, in a weird way, because I do see a lot of these orbs, in playthrough, you get pretty powered up pretty fast in this kind of game. Especially with all of the different types of weapons you have. It's great to feel powerful in shmups and everything, but I actually question if they did it too fast here. Like even in Gradius, a game where in a single stage, you can get most of the power-ups by carefully collecting all of the options. You still have the option to choose how you would like the power-ups. In this, the red orbs are pretty plentiful, and you can time them, so this way you make sure that you get the one that you're in need of to upgrade. So, I wonder if they could have either made them not so powerful, I guess, or if they could have just focused on making it so this way you don't feel fully upgraded so early on.
Yeah, I guess the counter is every time you collect a pickup that is not the one that you last picked up, your firing pattern, I guess, changes entirely. There's only I couldn't really get a perfect handle on what was going on because it seems that if you have everything maxed out, you get this great omnidirectional fire that you can either have mostly going into the corners or mostly going in a cross pattern. But if you're picking them up and you're not fully maxed out, you're either getting sort of a spread with the rings or just that straight on shot with
right.
The
it's
laser.
Whatever you picked up last.
Yeah. So I figure it's not none of them are perfect, and it's more so you're sort of switching between at the later numbers of each power up. You're just sort of picking what kind of fire you want, and it's not really getting fully upgraded until you've pretty much maxed everything out.
In addition, players can fire bombs, which they have a limited supply of, that destroy the enemies on screen. But interestingly, maybe in a first, these don't do any damage to the bosses, so they are encouraged to be used in the actual stage rather than I'm just gonna save my bombs for the big boss fight. Won't do you any good here. Better make sure you use them when you need them.
Yeah, I don't think that that's necessarily the best solution, but I do sort of appreciate it actually, because I find myself in games like this that have if it's a shmup and it has difficult boss battles, I find myself discouraged from using the power ups when I really need them because I got to save them for when I'm going to die if I don't have them. And I don't know, it feels like it sort of robs a little bit of the fun sometimes, where I'm like, well, I don't want to use any of this cool stuff I've got because I'll probably absolutely need it when I fight a boss. So, like, I think there's probably a better way of doing it where it's like you get the best of both worlds, where, there's one that works better on bosses and one that works on, regular enemies. But this was still, I think, a step in the right direction.
Right, and Sean mentioned, that as you collect the power-ups, if you're not fully maxed out, you switch to that weapon. And so if you aren't at the fully maxed out stage, you might want to take advantage of knowing which weapon the boss is weak to, because these bosses do have a weakness to either the laser, the ring, or the missile, which you could use to your advantage if you figured it out on playthroughs, or if you just go on Game FAQs or whatever. There's an easy way to find this out. I do like that by making the bombs not usable, it does become a little bit of a Mega Man style strategy with the weakness. It's not that they necessarily have a weak point that you should be aiming for, although, there is a certain part you need to hit them in. That's just the part that does any kind of damage to them. There's, in addition to that, there's also, like, if you had the laser, that one will, take out the boss faster. And these boss fights are designed in a cool way where they have to black out the rest of the screen in order to display the awesome sprites that the bosses are.
Yeah, I like that the bosses aren't just a... there's a lot of games where the bosses are just a moderately larger sprite that you're firing at, and a lot of these shmups, it's just like a big boat or a big... a big plane, and they're all just kind of big planes. I like that this one kind of has set pieces, especially when you're kind of falling through a pit, and there's just this weird worm that's going around, and then actually there's a lot of worm bosses in this game, but they're different kinds of worms. But you're trying to dodge the worm, and then you're fighting the actual thing, and then dodge a worm again. And it's fun. It's good stuff.
Classic gameplay loop. Worm, boss, worm.
Burai Fighter also allows you to choose your difficulty, something that occasionally on a shmup you might see like normal and hard. Burai Fighter seems to imply that at least there's also an easy mode. But I ask, is there an easy mode in shmups? Can there ever just be a mode without it being devoid of enemies where it is the same stage, but it's actually easy? And I don't mean for hardcore shmup players. I mean for the entry-level person who would really want to beat one of these games. What would it take for it to be a actual easy mode?
I mean, I guess it could be either fewer projectiles coming from the enemies, or like you can tank more hits or something.
Yeah, you get a regenerating shield.
Oh, I like that.
Story mode.
Yeah, I was going to say story. The story. Stop the cyborgs from killing all humans.
Is there like a, how they have like arachnophobia mode now in a lot of games? There's like a what if you're afraid of worms? Turn the worms into spiders.
Oof.
The Burai are cyborgs, right? They're like, I think they're described as robo-mutants, but they're half organic, half robot. Their plan is just to conquer the universe. It's a really big plan. They realize how big the universe is? Like, did they even conquer a single planet? Yeah.
But I think if you're a synthetic organism that has no concept of mortality, then the amount of time that it would take to conquer the universe is immaterial.
Right, so in a game like Stellaris, is there anybody who wants the entire galaxy? Who's just like, that's their goal?
I mean, kind of any player.
Right, and so maybe the player needs a reality check and should just be told, like, hey, focus on the planet you got. It's in pretty bad shape.
I mean, you could say that. But
are the Burai really even thinking about the implications, or are they just these weird? I mean, like, do they the bosses that you fight in this game, like that snake thing? It's not it's not obviously the Burai, right? Like that's not one of the half organic, half robot things. I mean, I don't see any robot like features on it, but sure, let's pretend. Are they utilizing their own army, or are they utilizing the planets that we're visiting? I have a lot of questions about the Burai.
Oh, you got to play story mode.
That's what story mode's for.
I just kind of wish that we still lived in an age where this sort of story was still acceptable. Like to be able to walk into a board meeting at a video game developer or whatever and just say like, yeah, that's going to be the story. And you just not get laughed at.
Just what are the enemies? Aliens. Cool, what's their plan? Conquer the universe. Great, anything else? They're also robots. If you do beat the game, the only piece of story you might get inside the actual game is a message seemingly from Taxon telling you that it is unreal. You have beaten the impossible game. You have earned their respect.
I've only wanted to be respected.
I mean, I appreciate that, but and obviously I didn't beat this game. I'm not good at this game, just like any other shmup. But this felt not anywhere near as impossible to me as a lot of other shmups we've had.
I agree. I also didn't beat it.
Did not beat it. Probably agree with the sentiment, although it does look, at least from what I saw, why I stopped playing at least, is that it does become a bit of a bullet hell towards the end, especially with the tough navigation of the narrow hallways. That like if the bullets don't get you in the tight spaces, then surely the tight spaces themselves will get you because you weren't heading in the correct direction. A little bit of memorization, a little bit of muscle, a little bit of muscle memory.
A little bit of brains and brawn.
On the sequels and spin-offs side, I got a bit of a fun one here because you would think that you guys have never heard of Burai Fighter, right?
No.
Well, it's not a franchise, but it's, usually you hear a title like that, especially there's something about the box art for Burai Fighter. It's just so untraditional. It's kind of cool. It's kind of poster-esque, but it's also got this weird, like, I don't want to say minimal, but just like...
Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, it's kind of plain with the cool serpent and everything. So, I don't know, it just doesn't look like an NES game. You could have fooled me and said this was on, like, ColecoVision or something, and I would have been like, sure. Don't mind the official Nintendo seal of quality being, like, right in your face. Anyway, my point to be was that, you don't expect a game like this to have a lot of sequels and spin-offs and everything. But instead, it has quite the tale on Game Boy, where it became Burai Fighter Deluxe.
Oh.
The Deluxe refers to the added versus multiplayer mode, where through the link cable, you can fight another... did we ever get the hero's name? But
Burai Fighter.
No, yeah. I was going to say, that Burai are the bad guys, but yes, he is the Burai Fighter. And so you can face off in a fun versus mode.
Maybe you're the Space Marauder.
Oh, so the Space Marauder is the color version of the deluxe version of this game. So the NES version became Burai Fighter Deluxe on Game Boy, and then the Game Boy Color version of Burai Fighter Deluxe was known as Space Marauder, which is the same game as the Game Boy one in color, but they've ditched the versus mode.
Huh. That sounds less fun.
They actually lost features in exchange for color? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, here's the question about that versus mode, though. Like, are both players, like, on the same... I mean, I know you're playing on your own Game Boy, but on the same screen at the same time? Or, like, can you scroll away from your other player where, like, you're looking at something different than they're looking at? Do you know?
I'm gonna find out. Yeah, I'm gonna find out.
Yeah, because if you're both in the same space at all times at the same time, I don't see why this couldn't have been in the NES game. You got two controllers, you got one big screen.
I can't imagine it worked that way. That would just be chaos, and each match would last a second.
I don't know. I have no idea what I'm talking about here, but it just feels like that would be like a limitation that like you could be playing in the same world but seeing different things even with the link cable.
Yeah.
But I don't know.
Huh.
So it's like you don't play the whole game or whatever, but it just is you're on separate screens. You're doing your thing on your Game Boy, and they're doing theirs on theirs, and basically, it's supposed to be who can score more points, right? But what it really comes down to, if you think about it, the way points work in this game, it really is just who can live longer.
So you could really play this game without a link cable, just figuring it out yourself.
Right.
The only difference is with the link cable, it looks like you get like a screen that says winner and loser if somebody dies.
Exactly.
Still want to play it, Joe?
And that's all it was, and they took that out of the color version.
Had to make sure they could get the color going.
Do you know how hard it is to fit color into a little thing like that?
Do you know how hard it is to always have a segue to the Essential Games list?
That seems
Well,
pretty
let's
hard.
find out on
The Essential Games list. Burai Fighter is a really cool game, and despite the troubles I had, as I mentioned, they were my own troubles. The game didn't make them that way. Sure, they could have maybe spelled it out a little more. I'm not sure how, but they could have. And if they would have, I wouldn't have thought any differently about the game. It wasn't like worse because my first experience was tough. It's like, if anything, it was like neat. It's like, oh, I overcame that barrier for myself. And then you overcome a few other obstacles, namely a bunch of enemies and a bunch of projectiles and a bunch of cameras that just change whenever the heck they want. But I feel like actually the way I was talking about the game was more exciting than the game I played. Especially just like the on-rail shooter and the horizontal and vertical movement at the same time and the multi-direction shooting. Like, it all actually is working in the game and everything. It just isn't, maybe it's just not used to its fullest potential throughout, because I didn't find this shmup with all of those features, and specifically the power-up system with its questionable choice of like forcing you to switch between weapons until you have the most powerful version, in which case you just get the most op weapon possibly in all of shmups. I didn't really see the moment-to-moment gameplay being something that actually was like encouragingly challenging and frustratingly fun or something like that. Instead, it was just kind of like, okay, like that's an idea. Write that down in my notes. We'll talk about it on the show. But it just kind of became like things we'll talk about on the show and less things that actually got me excited. And so I think for that reason, it's definitely a play it in my book, but not on the Essential Games list. Sean?
Yeah, I think mechanically, this is probably one of the best feeling shmups to play. And it's actually the second shmup in a row that is broken with that tired idea that shmups are just a template that lazy games just get, churned out. I'm pleasantly surprised with the variety of shmup that we've been getting recently, but at the end of the day, it is still a shmup, and a lot of where these games sort of separate from the pack is their vibe and the aesthetic, and I just didn't. This game doesn't have a lot of style. It has cool boss fights, and I really like the base mechanics, but the backgrounds are kind of blah, the enemies are kind of blah, and the story was not even thought about. Even as like a fun little, like, we made Burai fun with whatever we were talking about. The game didn't. So I agree. This is definitely a play it, but not essential.
I'll echo you on the mechanics there. I think that the mechanics were a highlight of this game. It was, really just in the fact, like, it sounds so simple, but in the fact that you can face any direction changes up the way you think about this shmup, like, compared to other things. And it really, it was a breath of fresh air in that sense. But as far as, like, the rest of the game, I'll be honest, you could probably take any, like, one of a dozen or so other essential votes that I've done for other shmups and, like, paste it here, and it's going to be the same thing. Like, it didn't blow me away. It didn't do anything that, like, stands out from the rest, other than that mechanic, which I don't think is enough for me to be like, yes, this is a must play. So I'm going to also say no, not an essential game.
And so therefore it won't be on the essential games list, but that's okay. Every game gets a chance at the essential games list, like our next game, Codename Viper, codename :Viper. So this way you know that his codename is Viper.
Oh, good.
But it says it's spelled out, codename :Viper.
Yeah, the colon is spelled out. Yeah, it's not
colon
two
dash
dots,
Viper,
right? Yeah.
Oh,
Dash
maybe
is
it's a
spelled out,
colon viper.
That's what I was thinking, too. It's like some kind of weird parasite that you have to...
I like that idea.
It's a Capcom game, so we like their stuff. Apparently, it's also an Arc System Works game, which is... They were making games back then? That's crazy. This will be our first Arc System Works game, so that's cool. These are the guys who make Dragon Ball Fighters, right? And the BlazBlue
I've never heard of
games
them.
and
I
all
don't
that stuff.
Maybe.
Interesting. Guys,
Maybe
they make
you're right.
beautiful... They make the most beautiful fighting games I've ever seen. Anyway, if that's not your cup of tea... the following week we'll be playing Conflict. That's what the game's called. Sounds like a board game, honestly.
It's just funny because it's like, oh, any good story or game needs a conflict. It's like they might as well just call
Conflict.
it like protagonist fights antagonist.
And that's by Vic Takai, who we've played many of his
Ooh.
games. Yeah,
Good old
friend of
Vic.
the show, Vic Vitae. Also, trying to ask questions, but this time I'll maybe try and relate it to the episode. We played a lot of shmups. So what's a franchise that you dig that you would like to see a shmup iteration into their franchise?
Ratchet and Clank.
A Ratchet and Clank shmup. Could you tell me
Here's
maybe
the thing.
like a power-up or two or something that they would do?
Yeah, I mean, they have so many interesting gadgets and like things that aren't, and weapons that don't just do like, they're good at coming up with things that aren't just like, this one explodes with a blast radius and this one, is a shotgun and this whatever. It's like they have like unique things. Like this one sucks enemies into it. One of them turns people into flaming ducks. Like all kinds of different like, this weapon makes people dance. I think that could be interesting in a shmup format. And yeah, in one of the Ratchet and Clanks, there's a weapon that makes any enemy in the game dance. Every single enemy in the game has, in case needed, their own animation for like the way that they would dance. So like, that could be cool.
Out of the park baseball.
But the shmup version. And is that just like, you're just kind of like tinkering with different like spaceships stats and sending them out onto the battlefield, and you're just like reviewing the battle reports afterwards and adjusting the lineup?
All right, no, not out of the park baseball then. Just like any kind of baseball. I just want a baseball themed shmup. I want to know how they do it. What would you be shooting? Is it baseballs? Is it bats?
You're the pitcher shooting baseballs at batters, and if they make contact, then you have to catch the balls and become the fielder. But otherwise, if they swing and miss, they blow up.
All right, you just developed the game for me.
There you go. I'll always help you out because out of the park baseball was a reach.
You're
and then
a reach.
My answer maybe a little more like in the realm of things that are possible. I feel like Kirby has had some shmup-ish levels where, like, because he's already, like, he always puffs up, and then he already has, when he's puffed up, he has the ability to blow out whatever air he's sucked in as one attack for an enemy. But imagine if he just had, like, he was permanently inflated, and that's, like, the plot of it. It's called Kirby's Permanent Inflation. And,
Jeez.
I mean, they did it with Sonic, right?
painful.
Yeah. They did it with Sonic the Hedgehog.
Isn't that actually like a level in Kirby's Dream Land?
I feel
Where
that's what
you're
I'm saying. I
inflated?
feel like it was like it's on a small way. It's already been done, but now imagine it's like a whole game with like, also riding, he rides those stars from level to level. It's like a little bit of that Kirby's air ride thing going on where
And your power-ups can be like sucking in enemies and then like getting their power-up
absolutely. That's the Kirby thing.
Yeah.
All right. So someone call Sakurai. We figured out his next Kirby game. He did make an on-rails Kid Icarus, which is another thing we were talking about today, right? Yeah. It's a great game. Kid Icarus Uprising. Great game.
Yeah.
Tough game to play on that system though, unless you
That's
have that
the 3DS game, right?
Yeah, you need to have like that weird attachment that gives you the second analog stick to really make it a good game, but whatever. I like the 3DS.